Before we proceed discussing the third type of macromolecule, which is proteins, let's have first a short review on carbohydrates and lipids. 10 seconds will be allotted for every question. I would like you to answer it before the answer is shown on the screen. Good luck! For this lesson, we will focus on proteins. And at the end of this discussion, you are expected to first recall the different types of proteins, their functions, and classifications. Second, describe the different structures of proteins. And last, explain the importance of amino acids in our body. Proteins are made up of hundreds or thousands of smaller units called amino acids, which are attached to one another in long chains through an amide or peptide bond. Proteins are organic compounds proportionally made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and small amount of sulfur and phosphorus. Just to add, it is the only biomolecule or macromolecule that contains nitrogen. Further, it is present in all cell organelles or all parts of the cell, abundant enough that it makes up approximately 20% of the human body. The main functions of proteins are as follows. First, it is considered as the most abundant biomolecules in cells and constitutes 50% of the dry weight of most organisms. Second, provides the different structure of living things that are crucial for growth, maintenance, and repair of body tissues. And last, these are responsible for energy and glucose synthesis. It is also acting as a regulatory roles for enzymes, hormones, transportations, and cell receptors, including regulation of fluid balance in an acid, base, or buffer reaction, and as antibodies and neurotransmitters. Okay, let's dig deeper about the several functions of proteins based on their types. There are 7 types of proteins, namely, first, enzymes or digestive enzymes, transport proteins, structural proteins, hormonal proteins, defense proteins or antibodies, contractile proteins, and storage proteins. Now, let's discuss it one at a time. First, as digestive enzymes. Enzymes are proteins or biological catalysts that help speed up metabolism or the chemical reactions in our bodies by lowering the activation energy of the reaction. We have these 8 common enzymes, but the 3 most common are amylase, that breaks starch down into its monomers glucose, the lipase, that breaks down fats into fatty acids and glycerol, and the protease, which breaks down or hydrolyzed protein into amino acids. Remember that each macromolecule is broken down by specific enzymes, and this is very important because it allows for easy absorption of nutrients by cells in the intestine. Pero bakit sa tingin nyo ay hindi natin fully nadadigest ang vegetables? Dahil wala tayong cellulose digesting bacteria in our stomach that release cellulase enzyme to digest the cellulose. Hindi tulad ng mga ruminants or grazing animals like goats and cows na mayroong 4 cubicles in their stomach as shown in the picture, in which digestion in ruminants occurs sequentially in a 4-chambered stomach. Plant material is initially taken into the rumen, where it is processed mechanically and exposed to bacteria that can break down cellulose. The rumen is a fermentation chamber in which bacteria digest the cellulose in grasses and feeds, converting them to fatty acids and amino acids. Second function, as transport proteins. Transport proteins transport substances across biological membranes or in the blood or lymph nodes. Examples are hemoglobin, which is an iron-containing protein in the blood of many animals, including in the red blood cells or erythrocytes of vertebrates that primarily transport oxygen to the tissues, and also the reason why our blood is red. Low hemoglobin levels usually indicate that a person has anemia. Iron deficiency anemia is the most common type. Another example is albumin, which is a protein made by your liver. Albumin helps keep fluid in your bloodstream so it doesn't leak into other tissues. And low albumin levels can indicate a problem with your liver or kidneys. Third function, as structural proteins. Structural proteins maintain cell shape. Within a cell, there is a network of fibers that facilitates movement, which collectively called cytoskeleton. There are three types of fibers within the cytoskeleton. We have microfilaments, intermediate filaments, and microtubules. Microfilaments are made of two intertwined strands of actin. Actin, along with motor protein myosin, engages in cellular events requiring motion gaya ng cell division sa animal cells. Actin and myosin are plentiful in muscle cells, which when slide past each other, your muscles contract. Intermediate filaments consist of several intertwined strands of fibrous proteins. However, they have no role in cell movement. Their function is purely structural. They bear tension forces, thus maintaining the shape of the cell. And it also creates supportive scaffolding inside the cell. Keratin is an example of intermediate filaments that provides rigid structure to our nail, hair, and the epidermis of the skin. The third type of cytoskeleton is the microtubules, which are small, hollow tubes. These are the widest components of the cytoskeleton that help the cell resist compression. And just like microfilaments, microtubules can dissolve and reform quickly to easily facilitate movement. Fourth function, as hormonal proteins. Humans have about 50 different known hormones. Hormones can be categorized into three distinct groups according to their chemical composition, gaya ng steroid hormones, peptide hormones, and amino acid derivatives or amines. Steroid hormones are lipophilic or fat-loving, meaning they can freely diffuse across the plasma membrane of a cell. Examples of steroid hormones include those produced by the gonads, gaya ng estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. Peptide hormones are hydrophilic or water-loving and lipophobic or fat-hating, meaning they cannot freely cross the plasma membrane. Peptide hormones include insulin, glucagon, leptin, ADH or antidiuretic hormones, and oxytocin. Lastly, amine hormones are derived from the amino acid tyrosine and include adrenaline, thyroxine, and triiodothyronine. Amine hormones do not all share identical properties and have properties common to both the peptide and steroid hormones. To better know the differences among these three types of hormones, kindly study this table. Okay? Now, look at this picture. It shows the different endocrine glands and the hormones they produce. The following are the endocrine glands found specifically in our body organs such as adrenal, thyroids, pancreas, pituitary, hypothalamus, ovary, testicles or testes, and thymus. For further reference, please study this table showing the different endocrine glands and their functions. But for this one, I'll be discussing some interesting hormones we have in our body. First is the oxytocin, which is a hormone produced by the hypothalamus and secreted by the pituitary gland. Aside from being a hormone that helps in muscle contraction to induce labor during birth, oxytocin is also considered as sex or love hormones. Yes, tama po. It is responsible for building attachment to a person. Alam niyo ba na when you hug or kiss a loved one or anyone, your pituitary gland releases oxytocin, which is especially important for pair bonding or building attachment, as it elevates your mood and makes you feel more attached to that person. Hence, the more physical contact you make with someone, the more you get attached to him or her. Kaya kung gusto mo talagang mag-move on, you need to cut by all means the skin-to-skin contact. And once your hypothalamus stops secreting oxytocin towards that person, that's the time you can openly say, gaya ng sabi sa kanta, I remember the boy or I remember the girl, but I don't remember the feelings anymore. Okay, next on the list are the hormones na may kinalaman sa ating feeding behavior. Bakit nga ba tayo nakakaramdam ng uhaw at gutom at kailan natin nasasabi na busog na tayo? This is because of the increased feeding behavior hormones such as the following. Thirst is a sensation created by the hypothalamus that drives organism to ingest water. ADH or antidiuretic hormone is a peptide hormone made in the brain, and aldosterone is a corticosteroid made in the adrenal glands. Both increase the sensation of thirst. Glucagon and ghrelin or hunger hormones are the other examples of feeding behavior hormones. Ghrelin stimulates appetite, increases food intake, and promotes fat storage. And when one is already satiated or full enough o nakaramdam na ng busog, ito ay dahil sa pagtaas ng leptin and cholecystokinin. Kapag ikaw ay kumain ng kumain, the fat cells in our body produce more leptin to signal the feeling of satiety, leading to increased leptin levels. Cholecystokinin is also involved with appetite by increasing the sensation of fullness because it reduces the rate at which food empties from the stomach. Yung feeling na busog ka pa, kahit 4 p.m. na, pero di ka pa nagla-lunch. This is because cholecystokinin does its job of delaying the emptying of our stomach. Next are the so-called happy hormones, gaya ng dopamine, which is a primary driver of the brain's reward system. Tumataas ito sa tuwing nakaka-experience tayo something na pleasurable, such as whenever we complete our schoolworks or projects, or when we celebrate our little wins or successes in life. Another is the oxytocin, the so-called love hormone, which activates the feelings of trust and attraction between people when it is released in the brain. Serotonin reduces depression. This hormone, and also as a neurotransmitter, stabilizes our mood, feelings of well-being, and even our happiness. Lastly, the endorphins or painkillers. Endorphins primarily help one deal with stress and reduce feelings of pain. Endorphins minimize pain by interacting with the opiate receptors in the brain to reduce our perception of pain and act similarly to drugs such as morphine and codeine. But unlike morphine and codeine, endorphins do not lead to addiction or dependence. Fifth, function as defensive proteins. The defensive proteins, also known as antibodies, are produced by the body to fight diseases and prevent injury. Without this protein, you are more likely to get sick and get diseases. Antibodies are defensive proteins that have binding sites whose three-dimensional structure allows them to identify and bind to very specific foreign molecules. The immunoglobulins, for instance, aid in destruction of certain pathogens gaya ng bacteria at viruses. We have several types of immunoglobulins like IgM or immunoglobulin M, found mainly in blood and lymph fluid. This is the first antibody that body makes when it fights a new infection. It is produced when a virus attacks our cells. Next is the IgA that acts as a first line of defense and resisting against infection by acting like a surface barrier na karaniwang matatagpuan sa gut lining natin sa intestine or digestive system, ganun din sa ating respiratory system. Meanwhile, IgE antibodies are involved in allergic reactions. Ang larger amount dito sa ating katawan indicates na maaari tayong merong allergy. Next is the IgD antibodies, which function as a receptor for antigen. It is reported to play a role in the induction of antibody production and the prevention of respiratory tract infections. Last is the IgG antibody, which is considered as the main antibody in blood, and it has a powerful ability to bind to bacteria and toxins. It also protects against bacterial and viral infections. In fact, this antibody protects you against infection by remembering which germs you've been exposed to before. Kaya nga, if those germs come back, your immune system knows how to attack them kasi na-recognize na nila ito. Sixth function, as contractile proteins na mahalaga for muscle contraction. The most important are the contractile proteins actin and myosin. They work together during the muscle contraction cycle in order to produce movement. Sila yung dahilan kung bakit natin na igagalaw yung ating mga katawan, yung ating mga muscles. Last function, as storage proteins, na karaniwang matatagpuan sa legumes ng halaman at maging sa albumin. Storage proteins primarily provide nourishment in early development of embryo and the seedling. Proteins are made from amino acids, and many storage proteins serve as reserves of amino acids in embryonic and developing organs or organisms. This is true in both animals and plants. We mentioned that proteins are made from amino acids. Amino acids are molecules that combine to form proteins. We have three classifications of amino acids, namely the 9 essential amino acids. It is essential kasi our body cannot produce them, so we need to get it from the food that we eat. Second is the 11 non-essential amino acids which our body can produce or synthesize. Pero there are also conditionally essential amino acids. Conditionally essential amino acids are normally non-essential, but must be supplied by the diet in special circumstances when the need for it exceeds the body's ability to produce it. These are only essential under special circumstances gaya ng time of illness or time of stress. We learned that a large number of amino acid residues bonded together in a chain by a peptide bond forms a polypeptide, which in turn makes up a protein. This time, we will tackle the 4 levels of protein structures. A protein's primary structure is defined as the amino acid sequence of its polypeptide chain. The secondary structure of proteins is determined by the pattern of hydrogen bonding. It may be an alpha helix or a beta pleated sheet. The alpha helix, which is a spiral conformation of polypeptide chains, and beta pleated sheet, which is a relatively compact zigzag shape, form because of hydrogen bonding between carbonyl and amino groups in the peptide backbone. Protein tertiary structure is the three-dimensional shape of a protein. The tertiary structure of a protein is the arrangement of the secondary structures into this final three-dimensional shape, or the particular three-dimensional arrangement of all the amino acids in a single polypeptide chain. And when a polypeptide chains fit together to form a complete protein, quaternary structure is formed. Quaternary structure allows a protein to have multiple functions, examples of which include hemoglobin, DNA polymerase, ribosomes, antibodies, and ion channel. Okay, now let's discuss the three classifications of proteins. These are simple, conjugated, and derived proteins. Simple proteins are those which give one amino acid only upon hydrolysis, or the process in which a polymer-like protein is broken down into its monomers of amino acids. Simple proteins are subclassed into globular and scleroproteins. A globular protein is spherical in shape. Fibrous proteins are also called as scleroproteins, which are elongated strand-like structures usually present in the form of rods or wires. Examples of globular proteins are as follows. We have albumins, globulins, gluteins, prolamins, histones, and protamines. And for scleroproteins, we have collagen, elastin, and keratins. Next is complex proteins. The key difference between simple protein and conjugated protein is that simple proteins are made of amino acids bound together to form a large molecule, whereas conjugated proteins are complex molecules containing simple proteins and non-protein components gaya ng carbohydrates, lipids, bound metal ions, and other organic groups. Examples are nucleoproteins, glycoproteins or mucoproteins, lipoproteins, phosphoproteins, chromoproteins, and metalloproteins. And for derived proteins, which are basically derived or obtained from simple and conjugated, can be grouped into primary and secondary. Primary derivatives of proteins are coagulate proteins, proteins, and metaproteins. And proteoses, peptones, polypeptides, peptides naman ang mga halimbawa ng secondary derivatives of proteins. Alright, we're done discussing the basics of proteins. But before you take the test, please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more lesson updates. Okay, let's find out how much you have learned from this lesson. For exercises 1, you have 10 seconds to answer each question, and 1 minute naman for exercises 2. And to know your result, your score, kindly click on the link provided in the video description. Good luck!